Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Tradex webinar, how to use the Tradex platform to manage your supply chain. So I'm Jenny, I'll be hosting the webinar today and helping out with any questions that you may have. And we've got Andrew Wallstone, the Solutions Manager, who will be presenting for you today. We'll be covering an introduction to the software, the approach for supplier accreditation, accreditation to support onboarding, finding and managing compliant suppliers, managing supplier performance, and reporting and management information. Throughout the webinar, we'll have a couple of poll questions. So I'm going to do one of those right now. So you should see a quick poll pop up. Okay, great.
We have some real extremes there, I think.
Share the results there. And that's how the polls work. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Andrew and he can start his presentation. Over to you, Andrew.
Great. First of all, thank you very much, Jenny, for the introduction. Thank you for your time, everybody, for taking time out your lunchtime or just before lunch to have a look at what Tradex is doing. So some of you may be familiar with Tradex already from the document exchange perspective, and that's where you're probably using it today for sending invoices, receiving invoices, maybe sending orders, maybe accessing requisitions catalogs, that sort of thing. But I would say in the transactional document world, and that's great. But really, in your businesses, before you can transact with a company, either a supplier or a subcontractor, you need to make sure that that supplier is suitable, that they meet any particular minimum criteria that you have as your organization from a compliance perspective. Now, whether that's on financial stability, whether that's on insurances, whether that's on their capabilities. And in order to do that, you need to put them through, or you're probably putting them through a PQQ, a pre-qualification questionnaire, or an accreditation process. So that's what we'll cover today. And as well as that, once you then start working with your companies and your supply chain, you need to make sure that those companies are performing in the way that you expect. And if they're not, well, do something about it, work with them in partnership to improve or replace, I guess. So that's really where supplier management comes in. It comes in to support the transactional aspects within Tradex with the accreditation piece, the ability to support the sourcing and finding the right companies to work for in the first place, and then making sure that from a performance point of view that they're continuing as you expect. So that's what we'll be covering during the next 25 minutes, 30 minutes or so. If you have any questions, as Jenny said, at any point in time, please put those into the poll and we'll come back to those at the end. Okay, so the first part you'll see is that you've got this supplier management menu at the top. So for those of you that are familiar with the Tradex interface, you probably won't see that module today because you don't have that one. But with this module on your account, then that's where you can see it and access the capabilities. Just navigating around the system, there's a few different areas and a few different roles. So depending on your role, whether you're in the supply chain team, whether you're in procurement, whether you're in estimating or commercial, you'll get different various different aspects, be able to do components within the system. So for example, adding suppliers, or just raising requests to have suppliers being added that are then fulfilled through an approval process. So there are a couple of main ones there. Later on, we'll cover in the reporting and also the analytics capability, some of the dashboarding tools within the system. We'll start off looking at the search and how we can find companies, and then covering some of the accreditation and then performance as we go through later on. But all of it from a user's perspective, day to day, is accessed through this supplier management or the front menu here. So let's start searching for companies. So if you're putting a bid together, responding to a bid, if you're looking for somebody to do something for you in a particular project or a contract, the first place you'd need to go to is search suppliers to find somebody. Now, you may know the company already, so you could type in their name. You may not know a particular company, but you may know that a particular package or a trade that you'd like them to fulfill, in which case you could then search the system by trade, and that will then allow you to then filter it down. Now, we have a standard trades list in the system if you don't have a preference, and that's based on UNSPSC, so that's some sort of United Nations standard services catalog that you could use in that structure here, where it's then going to go through particular categories, and we've got a number of categories in there, but you could also use your own categories to search and import those and match those to our standard list. The same is true, so if the project is in a particular location or country, you can again filter this list down to make it relevant, but you could also filter down your list of suppliers to be returned just working in a particular area and just serving a particular trade, or you could then filter down on other information that you can see here, such as particular status that you have with them, such as that you might know the contact name or certain activities that you need. But just searching the entire database will then come back with a list. There's two main aspects of the list that I'll bring your attention to. One is the traffic light. So this reflects the relationship status that you have with them, and that also drives the ordering on the system. So the ordering is based on your own preferences, but a typical example would be strategic suppliers above considered suppliers, above pending suppliers. And if I then continue to page 2 of the results, you can see that I might have some red traffic lights of inquiry only, maybe some investigation, and they're displayed with an amber and a red traffic light. And then below that, you'll see any companies that are identified with a grey traffic light. So grey traffic light indicates somebody that you don't have a relationship with, probably never spoken to, never met. However, they're in the platform because they've completed the information to be part of the core Tradex platform, or one of our other customers, they've completed their profile details. So you can still see some information about them, but you would need to invite them into your supply list in order to work with them properly, but you might then want to put them through a workflow approval process through the accreditation process that we'll cover in a moment. So that's the main part. It's about having a tiered relationship level, and the system can then keep that automatically updated for you. So as information expires, such as accreditations or insurances or policies, then that can then move them onto an amber or eventually red if they ignore you completely. And that would then be the first level of ordering. The second level of ordering is then based on the star rating on the right-hand side. So here you can see, based on the feedback that we've got from your site teams, that we're taking an average of their scores and we're ordering that within the system as well. And later on, we'll take a look at how that information is captured, but really pushing that performance feedback back to everybody using the system so they can see exactly the right people to work with and then the best companies to work with. And then from the search results directly, you can then get a list out of the system. You could send them emails, and I'll come back to workflow in a moment, but you could start workflow processes. So the system supports business approval processes, and you can then put that supplier, if you know something's changed, you might want to put them through a PQQ again manually, or put them through some other processes. Or you could click into this supplier itself and see all of the detailed information that we're capturing. Now, some of these sections are standard to the system. So we've followed an industry standard on PAS 91. So that's a little bit like a British standard or an ISO, but it's a publicly available standard. So it's PAS 91, which is a standard list of questions that covers health and safety, financial, insurance, contact details, etc. We've added to that as well, and then when you set up the system, you can configure your own additional questions, or you can remove some of the standard ones if you don't feel they're relevant, or you could add your own sections completely. So really that's very, very flexible to say, okay, we've got a starter for 10 of all of common information. You review that and think, well, actually, we work in a particular area. Maybe that's in the rail sector. We've got additional requirements around design or particular geographical regions. We want to capture that information as well. And you also have the ability to store internal information. So information that you don't want to share with your subcontractors when they log onto the system to complete the details. And that might be your feedback about them. It may be information about internal accounts systems that you want to store references or generate references, or it might be other information such as contract details, expiry dates, things like that, that you'll store in the system, you'll still use, but then you'll maintain on their behalf. So for each section, you can have various different parts of information and any documentation that's relevant as well. So you can force the suppliers to complete the questions, upload documents, give you information, and that can then be reviewed as part of a process. You can also ask them to complete their trades, and tell us what they do and where they do that when they're completing their information online. So all of this forms a very rich database that you can then use, your end users can share, and it's really available for reporting, for notification, for alerts, and you don't have to update this information yourself. The suppliers will get an email with a link, with a username and a password. They'll log on to the system directly, and then they'll start to complete the information in their profile. You can keep a track on that, and then you can monitor that as that goes through. And that then drives some of these processes. So that monitoring and that accreditation, and I've used the term before, is around these workflow processes. So workflow is a business process tool that's embedded into the system. So you may have an accreditation process, so for example, something like a PQQ or a pre-qualification questionnaire, and we have the ability within the system to build on your behalf your process into the system. So this might be an accreditation that needs to be reviewed initially. So maybe a PQQ would go out to the supplier, they'd get an email, they'd go in and update their details. Once they've done that, it'll then come back to somebody in the admin team, maybe to review it. You might then need to assign that to somebody in health and safety. You might need to assign that to somebody in insurance. You might need to refer it to head of procurement, but then eventually it will either be maybe sent to finance, approved or rejected, and then the status in the system updated, the supplier notified, maybe the person internally that requested that initially notified as well. And so that really you're getting the system to send the chasing emails, to send the tasks, so you're not having to track who's doing what in email or tracking any Excel spreadsheets outside of the system. That's all controlled and managed. Now, these processes drive a number of different aspects. It might be performance reviews, supplier requests, accreditations, or other processes that you may want to build into the system wherever you need people to review and approve certain aspects of information before something else happens. So that's looking so far at how we manage the accreditation process behind the scenes, and then each person will then get a series of tasks where they then need to perform particular tasks such as review, make a decision, feed it back, pass it on, escalate it, whatever needs to happen, so that that then gets reviewed within the system. Okay, so that's a very, very quick view at the first two aspects, which is the finding a supplier, the supplier database, and the accreditation. Jenny, did we want to run a quick poll at this point just to see how relevant that is?
Absolutely. So I'll go with does your organisation accredit suppliers?
Perfect. So I can see, is that everybody looking at the
Yep.
results?
Yes. 71% managed by a central team and 29% managed by different people throughout the business.
Perfect. Okay, fine. So in that way, you could see how the workflow, if it's a central team, would come back to a central team. They may then need to pass it off to other experts on exception, or with a 29%, just an approximate number, you could then route that to other people within the business through the system. They'd get a task and an email and then process it through there. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Fine. So with suppliers accredited and working on projects, you can then start to see how they're doing. And that moves to the second part, which is the projects or the performance management aspects of the system. So within here, we can define a list of projects and also capture configurable information about those projects. So if I look at this Causeway Park one here, we can then start to capture some information such as where is the project, who's the client, what's the key dates, that sort of information. Now this information that you're looking at on the screen is completely configurable, so you can set lots of different information to be captured as relevant. So sometimes you may want to get really, really detailed, so you're starting to build up a great project database in the system, or others you might just want basic information, but you have the ability to configure that. We then put suppliers on the project, which is what this list is here. So you'd look at your accredited list, and when they start working on the project, you can do that. And then for each of the suppliers working on the project, you can also capture information that's relevant for that supplier's work on the project. Something like, you can see on the screen, their trade, the status, the tender value, contract value, etc. Now, this may be pre-contract, so from an estimating perspective, you may want to use this to capture estimating and the helpfulness there. And from a post-contract and a sort of, an order perspective, you can also capture their feedback and information that you're capturing. Maybe particularly tender value, contract value is particularly useful, because then we start to use the workload reporting to see what is our reliance on the vendors, on these suppliers in the future. Now, these performance reviews can be scheduled, so we can say, we as a business, we want to capture feedback on a quarterly basis, on a weekly basis, and I would like to go out to different people within that team who are responsible on that project. So the commercial person could have could complete their section, health and safety their section, technical their section, and then have a main assessor that's then reviewing everything. So that would again use a workflow process to push out tasks to various people on the project at key times, get information, the feedback, and then route that for review and approval, finally submitting the information in the database. And what that looks like is a performance form that is completely configurable, so you can choose which sections, which questions, which answers, and also the weighting of the score as well. So if you want to put more importance to aspects such as health and safety, commercial over timeliness, cleanliness, etc., then you can start to build all of that into the system and configure as much as you like. So here you've got some idea of where you then would want to capture feedback, and each of the options that they select behind the scenes captures that particular score. So you define a number. We then take the average of this particular review together with all of the other reviews, maybe within the last 12 months or last dozen reports that have been completed, and that would then be submitted as an average, and that affects the star rating that you saw at the beginning on that search results page. So putting that information, feeding that back into the system. And you can, of course, then drill down into a particular supplier from the search results and access their feedback that you got and see the detail behind it. So when you're working with these companies on a regular basis, you've actually got real statistical information rather than, well, there's hearsay or there's some ad hoc comments. We've got a formal process to capture information and feed that back. Now, at the moment, you're looking through the web view, but we'll also have a mobile app that we're launching that will also capture this information as well. So whether people are on site with a connection or don't have a connection, so support for offline use, they can still capture this information and then feed that back. So that's a little bit about the performance management. And that's capturing the information, routing it round, people have tasks, review that, complete that, and submit that into the system. Now, making use of that system, as I mentioned, one area is the search results, another is the report writer. So you can create your own reports that may want to report on any of the information in the database, such as SMEs, workload reporting, where you want to report on tenders and you want to report with projects over a period of time, or it might be just straightforward insurance details or financial information that other people need within the business. Now, these reports can specify criteria. So I'm only interested in companies with less than 50 people. I'm only interested where companies have insurances expired. You'd configure the columns of information that you would like, and then you can schedule that to run on a weekly, monthly basis and automatically email the report to certain people at that point in time. And that's, I would say, straightforward list reports out of the system for statistical information. Where we need to provide that either performance or accreditation information in a slightly more graphical view is where the analytics tool comes in. So here you can see we've got some information, let's say around supplier status, where I may want to look at suppliers number in a particular region, what's our internal stats around processing these PQQs, where are we bidding with suppliers that are perhaps got them on bids more than their turnover or more than a comfort level of their turnover. Here we may want to look at the performance information, so that feedback that we're getting, how many reviews are we capturing, which projects are good at before providing that performance feedback, but then actually, of course, use that. So what are our top 10 trades? What are our bottom 10 trades by supplier, by category, by region, by business unit? However we want to slice that information, we can. And then if we're starting to mix this with the transactional information, it then starts to get a little bit more powerful as well. So we can say, okay, fine, I want to know spend, or where am I? If we just, let's go full screen, perhaps on this particular one. So this workload management, for example, is combining the accreditation information and the transactional information that we're getting from the core Tradex platform itself. So we may want to see the turnover of a particular company or all companies versus the amount of time they're returning tenders to us versus time that they've got preferred status, they've been awarded the contract, or all of that together. So we can then start to see, well, actually, here we've got it at the moment in a sort of almost in 7 months, whatever, Q1 of next year. We're then starting to see that we've potentially got an over-reliance on that particular subcontractor because their turnover is 10 million and we're actually have awarded them and potentially put them on preferred status for bids for £7.5 million worth of work. Well, actually, that's a bit of a risk for us. Maybe we need to look at other subcontractors in that area or get particular sign-off from senior members in the business to make sure that we're happy with that level of risk within the business. Or we may want to then look at the accreditation information. So we may then want to see, okay, what are our top 10 projects? How many performance reviews? Where are we getting the best suppliers across the project? So we start to really use all of that information that we're capturing with the system, whether it's from a tendering perspective, whether it's from an accreditation, performance, or where it then really comes powerful is start to mix that in with the spend analytics. So where are we taking those suppliers and where are we putting our spend? Is that with the better performing suppliers? Is that with the suppliers that have the best relationship with us? So we can then start to monitor that. All of these widgets, you can define your own tabs across the top, and you can configure your own widgets, or we'll provide a number of widgets, as standard that are relevant to your business. So all of the I guess questions, sections, all of that information that you've seen so far is fully configurable. So the supplier management is a self-service tool where if you want to define as an administrator to the system all of the email templates that go out, all of the questions that you want to ask for suppliers, the performance, if you want to manage your trades, if you want to manage the screen of welcome messages, of ways that we export information to other systems, generate reference numbers, control the trades, all of this information is purely configurable by one or two system administrators that would have a higher level of access into the system, so you can configure that yourself as your business changes, as you go into different territories, regions, as regulations change, as other people come into the business. You can then say, well, actually, we're not asking for particular, I don't know, asbestos questions, or we're not asking for London regulation questions, or we're moving into a different country and we need to capture additional information from our suppliers. You can now go into the system, add additional sections. You can then put those out, find out, then run a report of who doesn't have that information populated, and then get the system to automatically send them an email template that you've configured. Can you now give us this information around health and safety regulations, or whatever it happens to be, and they would then complete that information in the system. So that's some of the behind the scenes work that goes on in setting up the system in the first place. So just before I end, perhaps it's worth just seeing from that performance part that we've just shown a poll, and to see people, if we run that last poll in the system.
Absolutely. So that last poll is, does your organisation track the performance of the supply chain? So once again, if you select one of the following answers and click submit, and then I can share all the results with you. So there are the results, Andrew.
Okay, so it looks as though for half of you have it in a system already, which is great. And another half is captured in spreadsheets, which is not unusual, or informally in people's heads, equally not unusual at all. So what we're trying to do is we recognize that and actually provide a little bit more of a formal, structured approach for capturing that feedback on your suppliers and subcontractors, make that information available to the people that have the relationship with those companies. So we feedback ultimately trying to improve, but also then trying to use that information in any of the dashboard reports, so that if you need to get additional trades, additional suppliers, subcontractors, you can do that based on factual information rather than hearsay, or only when things are exceptionally good or exceptionally bad, that you actually do something about it. So trying to keep an eye on that. So that was a very quick run through and an overview of the supplier management capabilities in Tradex, adding on to the existing document exchange and transactional aspects that you're probably familiar with already, and using then the ways of storing and searching the database as a centralized database for the industry, if you like, for all of the Tradex users, or just for, and particularly for your supply chain, giving you the ability to maintain those questions and the information that you captured and things like relationship statuses yourself, supporting that accreditation process where you can then push questionnaires out to internal staff, push them out to internal staff for reviewing, to suppliers get into the system in the first place, and then out to the suppliers and subcontractors to come in online, complete the information themselves, and once that information's in there, you can then automatically update external systems with exports out of the system. And once you've then got them accredited, put them on projects and start capturing feedback. So we then start to use that information. And then finally, the analytics, where we start to bring together the accreditation, the performance, and perhaps the transactional aspects to then say, well, what are we doing with the supply chain? What's our accreditation level? Are we putting the spend with the right suppliers? Are we putting the spend with the right suppliers from a category or from a performance perspective? So thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them either now into the meeting panel, the control panel that you have in front of you, or of course, please feel free to contact us afterwards and answer any questions. And if there's anything particularly unique to your organization that we haven't covered, please let us know and we'll see if we can to follow up with that.
Great, thanks very much, Andrew. We haven't had any questions come in just yet, so we can wait a couple of minutes just to make sure no one's got any questions they want to type into that question box. But as Andrew said, please do feel free to get in contact with us whenever is convenient to you, and we're more than happy to answer those questions. So with that, thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you very much.